In her own words, Ahunna Eziakonwa is a child of war, spending her formative years in her native Nigeria. Over 1 million people perished during the 30-month brutal civil war, fought over the claim to make Biafra an independent republic. She found a home in the United Nations, an organization she joined in the late 1990s. After finishing college and volunteering for 5 years, a mother of a daughter realized that global politics shape the world and the need to understand the forces that rule around us, which led her to join Columbia University, study international and public affairs. Eziakonwa now leads UNDP's Africa Bureau, under the rank of Assistant Secretary, which oversees a $1 billion program in over 46 countries. She talked with Fortune's managing editor in an exclusive interview while in Addis Ababa 2 weeks ago, attending a summit of African heads of state.
Don't find it frustrating to work for the UN system. I find it frustrating that we're not always able to prevent the worst, the ugly consequences of war. And the suffering and misery that it creates for people. That frustrates me and it keeps me up at night. But I chose to work for the UN. It was a very deliberate, intentional choice. I could have worked for any organization, and I work for the development arm of it. And I think it's still the best chance that the world has to lay the foundations that help us to live in peace with each other. I haven't found anything better, let's say. And to be frank with you, when I'm most tempted to doubt, and I guess I'm fortunate in this sense, I'm reminded of all the good work that I've seen, I've witnessed and been part of in the UN system. All the lives that have been saved, all the lives that have been improved, all the dignity that's been established in some cases of human beings that did not have that dignity, I'm reminded of my colleagues who have given their lives for this work. For me, the moment of doubt is often being around when member states, when multilateralism seems to be disintegrating, when the sort of collective solidarity, global solidarity and collective responsibility to protect and keep people safe and living in dignity, when it has seemed to sort of dwindle. And we've seen that in the last few years. And I still believe that an organization like UN can help remake that. And actually, multilateralism has always been presented as a solution, and it has worked at critical times in history, with nations coming together to make a difference and make the world better. But it was never perfect, right? And it, in any case, needed a facelift, a remake. In a perfect world, we want all who have power, the elite, the powerful nations, to be in agreement on a number of things that we ought to do. After all, they did come in agreement on the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, right? Mm-hmm. If you look at the 17 SDGs, they touch on governance issues that are actually very difficult issues, justice issues. That didn't come in the MDGs. They even touch on the most contentious issues of climate, nature-based solutions. This no one believed. I mean, it remains a divisive issue, but it is an SDG that has been adopted and signed off on, right? Mm-hmm. So we've got the framework to actually unify the world around the kind of world that we want to see. One that is peaceful, one that is prosperous for all, shared prosperity, and one that has the potential of saving the planet. So it's about people, planet, and prosperity, right? And that's what the SDGs represent. And it's still there. We've got less than 10 years to achieve it. The world is being hit by several tsunamis in the last few years that's actually retarded the progress that we saw on the development side. So we've had COVID, that was a slap in the face. We've had now the war in Ukraine. These two factors, and then of course the huge impact of climate change, is really led to a setback. In the last 2 years, consistently, we've seen a downward trend in human development. Actually, poverty levels were back to the 2016 levels. So we have a lot of catching up to do, and that's why multilateralism has to be rethought and reshaped and strengthened, because more than ever before, the world will need each other. The reason I chose UNDP is precisely because it doesn't just try to do one thing. Because human development isn't just about a single variable. It isn't just about health or education or water. It's the whole chain. So multidimensional poverty, which is what UNDP specializes in trying to understand. Mm-hmm. And that's the brand, that's the UNDP brand that I find personally very attractive. I mean, we're a UN agency, and our funding comes primarily from member states. Both those in developed countries and those in developing countries, our program countries, are contributing immensely to the development in their own countries. We don't give that much credit to them, actually. In this country, in the last 4 years, Ethiopia has contributed $22 million to UNDP's work in Ethiopia, right? And that could grow. Because when you start to have your value proposition and the government sees where they could get more mileage through a UNDP channel than through their own systems, they use UNDP. And I give you an example. In Senegal, the government said, we want to close the development deficit that we have in remote areas where it's been very difficult for government to extend services. We're going to give you $200 million as UNDP within 2 years to accelerate development for us. Our systems are slower, and we want to get development to the people fast. We did that work and created impact in places that had not been touched by development. In DRC today, we're doing the same. The government said to us, we want to cover 54 territories that have been without development for years, because our capacity, our systems are not yet there. And by the way, it's not replacing government. That's what I was because thinking. In Senegal, we did this within 2 years, and then there was a second phase taken over by government. That's a deep question. I always think poverty is a mindset issue, right? If we just take the continent of Africa, this continent has no business being poor, right? Because it's got it's got more resources, natural resources, than some countries that are giving it money today. Mm. So what's the problem? Is it that individuals on this continent are lazy, dull, not smart enough, they can't think for themselves? Or is it that we have structural constraints, local, subnational, regional, and global, that slow down prosperity? Or is it a mindset issue that we have this predominant effect of either colonialism or whatever that tells you that you can't and you have to be dependent? Is there a dependency culture that has sort of enveloped African countries and made them, sort of lose sight of where they can actually apply themselves to take control of their destiny? Is it about agency? And I think it's about all of it. Structurally, globally, we look at the trade area, for instance. We still have very unfair governance systems at the global level when it comes to trade and the valuation of African products. When it comes to the global financial systems, we still have very unfavorable conditions for African countries. You have African countries borrowing at 5, 6, 7 times more than other countries, particularly in the rich world. And the reasons for this, of course, they get technical. But for the most part, when you start to break it down, you see that Africa has a perception issue. And the risk rating of the continent is so unfair. Because the return on investment is actually much higher in Africa than in many places. But Africa gets a bad rap on its risk levels, which then increases its rates of borrowing. Every country is borrowing to do development. When Africa borrows, it gets into a debt trap, because also the servicing, the amount of money it has to put forward to service that debt is off the charts. So these are global structural, for instance, manufacturing and, Africa's ability to industrialize and add value to its natural resources. It's not so much because Africa doesn't have scholarship that can, put the systems in place and the machinery in place for this to happen. There is a global structural fault line where Africa was always designed, economies were designed to service economies in the rich world in terms of raw materials. We've actually never been able to overcome that, to the point that I think the world got so used to tapping their raw materials from Africa that they would not stand for Africa improving the value, adding value to its products, because then where are you going to get the raw materials from? So what does Africa face? Very unfair tariff systems. Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, and let's say, the cocoa producers in Africa, for instance, come together and say, we're going to start producing chocolate and exporting chocolate to some of these countries instead of raw cocoa. Do you think that was easy? Or that would be easy? Mm-hmm. Those countries that are tapping into the cocoa, which they then improve and make millions and sell back to Africa, are not going to just give up and let you produce. So these systems have to change. There has to be more justice in the way the world is configured at the economic, at the political, at the social level. I think that if you take the different global platforms, even the global financial systems, I'm not, the first to say it. There is a consciousness that the system is not so far designed to favor poor countries and a complete eradication of poverty. So it needs to be looked at. What are some of the things that are, constraining efforts of African countries to prosper within that system? I mentioned a few. You look at the global trade, we have an African on that seat now looking at some of the issues, but it's not going to be easy, but the elephant in the room has to be addressed somehow if we're going to get there. I'm not one to lean towards the traditional, and protect mandate and all of that. I believe in change. I really believe in evolution of things. I believe in innovation, creativity, adaptation, adapting to new realities. And I have to say, my year now in UNDP, and that's why I continue to stay, because it is refreshed all the time. We have an administrator whose core interest, and actually that's what made me apply for the post, when he sort of laid out his vision for the organization and put innovation at the center. And I was like, yes, we need to innovate as an organization. We need to become future smart, right? And nothing actually stops you from doing that. Not even your governance board. We have so much room to reinvent ourselves, and that's exactly what we're doing, We never really dealt with financing, for instance, as an organization. UNDP was a fund, right? So in our creation, we were like a fund. And we know that funding as a concept is outdated. When you look at the bill for the SDGs, it isn't about ODA anymore. It's about financing. And so UNDP established a finance sector hub. It's not a financial institution. We're not the World Bank or the ADB. We're still a development services agency, but we know the critical importance of financing of the whole fiscal space for fostering development. So we want to understand it, and we want to build it into our DNA. And this has happened just in the last few years. The same thing with climate. This is a new disposition of the organization. So we are constantly changing. In fact, we are blamed more and more for undertaking, for constantly reforming ourselves. Now you have UNDP offices that are able to accompany countries to look at innovative financing, impact financing. We're mobilizing bonds. We're mobilizing, we're helping countries understand debt issues, for instance, and how to get around the impact of debt on development financing. We are leading on what we call integrated financing framework of countries. Let's say a country adopts a framework where it starts to understand, because there is a false narrative that financing for development has to always come from outside. So in the past, we focused a lot on aid. Now we know that aid is important only up to a point, and we need to enable countries to gaze beyond aid, to gaze into their own financial capabilities. And it's quite surprising, because when COVID happened and every country sort of went into their own shells, that was when a lot of African countries realized that the resources they had and the fiscal space that they could mobilize. Even with all the depressing things happening in the world, and when I'm most tempted to doubt, what really boosts me is when I happen to be in the privileged position of covering 46 countries, and I'm able to go to these countries and observe for myself what the teams are doing. And I don't just listen to the team, I listen to the clients. And when I hear them say, we cannot do without UNDP right now. We're relying on UNDP for this. We're relying on UNDP. We're grateful to UNDP that it helped us do this. And it's always about I think the attractiveness for them is that we're accompanying, right? We're not taking over. We're building capacities. Criticism that I embrace because I don't think, and you just point to me any country that was able to develop without a state and without a capable state and capable institutions. Now, to think that as a UN, we are first of all invited by the country. We're guests in the country. We're not a state. There has to be an authority to work with, okay? If we don't engage with the authority, what side are we on? UNDP is on the side of the people, and we cannot replace the state. So we need to invest in the emergence of states that are accountable to their people. That's what we work on. That's why we work on governance. Governance is one of the areas, one of the pillars of UNDP. And I'm passionate about this, because I say to myself, if you look at all the countries that have succeeded, they had strong, capable states that started by creating that sort of trust between them and society, because states need society to trust them. That's why we work on governance. Governance is one of the areas, one of the pillars of UNDP. And if you have a breakdown of trust and there's no social contract, it's a non-starter for development. And for us to think that we can diminish the power of the state, you have to diminish the power of the state that is oppressive. That I would sign up for. If a state is oppressing its people, right? I'm not going to feed into that state to continue oppressing its people. I'm going to look for entry points to make that state accountable I'm going to look for ways to empower the citizens to hold their leaders to account so that they're doing right by them. It's not my role to remove that state. We're not into regime change. This is not what the UN is created for. But we have international standards. And that's a value that the UN brings to states, because all these countries have signed up to these standards. And it is our role to remind states that are failing what those standards are and the need for them to embrace them. I actually think the AFCFTA is a miracle. This is the way I observe it, because I've been a student of this continent for a long time. 55 countries, diverse, in every way. And if I think how long it took the European Union to form itself, and still how much pain that they have to keep the Union together. And I think that under 2 years, the African member states were able to adopt the AFCFTA under 2 years. And within a year, we had ratifications that met the threshold to begin. This is a miracle. This is Tamrat. Trust me. And today, I think I have, I was hearing that at the AU summit now, we had an additional 2 countries that submitted their instruments for ratification. That brought us to 46 out of 55 countries that have now ratified within how many years? A very short period of time. I think that's the way we have to see it. Actually, Africa doesn't have the luxury of not getting this AFCFTA on a speed lane of implementation. That's why UNDP is involved in it. There should be some impatience around it. Yes, we can record the progress and commend and salute this speed of ratification, but that for me also, it's not a small thing that we have today 46 countries within only a couple of years who have ratified. It's a signal of their legal commitment to give each other this free trade, right? The question now is, how do we make this real? Not just at the level of the elites who trade, but for the ordinary man, woman who should be benefiting from this. Look at the people who trade in our borderlands. They're mostly women, but they go through hell. In the crossing, lack of free movement, lack of, enabling environment. How can we, through this AFCFTA, identify changes that will ease the way for them? This is a tough question. For me, for someone who loves this country, I feel like this is my second home. When I left here, did I imagine that, I left here on a high? If you remember, peace had returned to Ethiopia, the struggle in our minds was over. We have to be humble also as international actors. I'm not Ethiopian, however much I love it. And I only lived here for 3.5 years. I cannot claim that I understood everything about the Ethiopian society. It would be doing this country a disservice to even suggest with such boldness that I could have read this, that, and the other. There are more competent Ethiopians who understand and who have lived a history, who could maybe, and not everything is imagined or even predicted, right? Things happen that you did not ever imagine would happen. And, was it painful? Yes, to see, because for me, I was invested now as a development practitioner that this country now was going to go full swing on development and the world would rally behind it, because it's 100 million people, and most of whom were still poor with their needs not met. There was so much to do, So for me, it was painful. Did I misread? I cannot claim to be the expert after only a couple of years. I think we probably could have listened more right? And charged ourselves to understand more the complexity of the transition here. I think where we failed was, maybe to look at things too much on the surface and think that it was simple and we had quick fixes. And the UN system is learning from this. There is, from Chad to the Sahel, there is no quick fix. These are complex transitions that require patience. I don't know if that is a fair criticism, because UNDP never supported war. I mean, it's not in our place. We don't support war, period. Of course, we were in different ways, not just UNDP, the whole UN system, constantly investing is where do we find solutions to arrest this? Because it is destroying lives and it's destroying the potential of this great nation to evolve into a prosperous nation. And the whole preoccupation throughout the period, which is why today we celebrate the peace, But were we the main actors? Was it up to us? I think it would be arrogant to think that, we put ourselves in the place of God or whoever to arrest this conflict. But were we doing everything, whether it was the Secretary General or, the appropriate entities in the UN system, to bring a solution to the problem? I would say the effort was there. I saw it from the inside. It might be difficult to see from the outside because a lot of it, of course, is done in ways that are constructive and not, publicly distracting the cause. There's a lot that goes sort of behind the scenes that we're not able to announce. But the UN play a role? I would say it was, we tried to play a positive role. A lot of lessons. I mean, digital came out quite strongly as part of the solution. That's why we now have a digital strategy as UNDP. This was the lesson of COVID, which we're taking very seriously. The administrator is invested in this. We want to roll it out in every country because we've understood the value of digital in the context of resilience building and shock-proofing development, but also accelerating development in many ways. I mean, so many things we didn't think could be done so quickly. When we applied the digital lens, we saw that. So that's a very important lesson, I think. I think, the second one in terms of from an organizational perspective is the role of the state in times of crisis. And that role for me is about the social contract. It's about social protection. That, shocks are now the new normal. They're going to be with us. And there were a lot of people who were left behind during COVID. And governments were scrambling to see how do we reach these populations. And UNDP was really right there, helping countries using digital also to identify where their poorest and most vulnerable lived, and to construct social protection systems, which was only at 20% on the continent. We had only 20% of Africa with social protection mechanisms. So this is tragic, So now starting to invest in helping governments understand the value, the importance in times of uncertainty and crisis to have a social protection culture as a state responsibility. That when it hits, you know where your people are and you know how to support them. The third one is on informality. The fact that the other thing that just hit us in the face is how much of Africa's economy was informal. COVID really brought this like a slap on our faces. Because what happened then is when countries were busy scrambling to put some stimulus, people were not on the books, right? 80% of the economy is informal. So how do we then, through our accelerator labs, started to look at this area of informality. We worked with ILO and others to really get, again, the state to understand the importance of integrating the mainstay of the economy into formalizing.